what was happening. Washington was creating a distraction because he couldn't, just because there was a couple hundred British on my hill where my house is, doesn't mean that was the 16,000. So he needed to make sure. So he used that distraction. He snuck around and looked up Limestone Road, which is about a mile west of my house.
Folks, today I've got a very special, important, and fantastic guest. He is a retired Brigadier General, David Deputy, and he has an incredible story behind this house, this home that he purchased, and it's called the Spring Grove Millhouse. And I don't know if you thought of yourself as being the steward of the Spring Grove Millhouse, but I would like to just jump right in and ask you a question, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, jump right in.
Thanks. So when you first bought the Spring Grove Millhouse, I would imagine that you thought you're just buying this renovation project, a restoration project, but at what moment did you really realize that you may have actually become the steward of this living piece of American history?
Yes, back in September of 2017, we were looking for an older house to live in, something built before cars, planes, electricity. That was kind of the only criteria I had in my mind. Having a history behind it would be icing on the cake, but not necessary. So we found this old house. Me and my wife, when we drove down the driveway, it's got a long driveway that kind of goes through the woods. Beautiful. And eventually you can start to see the house, and it's just magical. And I just kind of sensed that there was history there before I even looked into it. The only thing we were told, it was built in 1880, which was incorrect. It's much older. And we were told the DuPont family owned it. In fact, it was referred to as the DuPont Ross House. So that's the only history we knew. That we didn't know any details about all that. And we were so focused on renovating because it was in kind of a little bit neglected over the past decade, and it needed a lot of fixing up. So I was kind of zeroed in on that because Florence was kind of focused on that. That was kind of the deal. We would make it look nice quick. So I kind of put the history aside for a while. But then about 6 months later, while we're doing all the renovations, my son's in-laws came to visit for the first time, and they brought a special gift with them, which was a map from 1868 of the local area. I'd never seen it before. So it was a large map, so we, rolled it all out on the dining room table and looked at the spot where my house is, and it had a dot and it had a name next to it. That's when we realized the house was much older than 1880. And of course, we wonder, how old really is it? So it also showed us that there was mill races running to a mill factory on the property that we didn't know existed. And so, like, wow, there's a whole lot of history here that we didn't know about. So we got real interested in trying to find out, all the details of what happened here and why. So that's kind of how we got started.
Okay. Now, you were a state trooper, were you?
Yes, I was a state trooper for almost 25 years, and I got to work in different areas. And one of the areas I worked as, I was a detective, and I was in the major crime squad. Some of those investigative skills kind of helped me with the writing the book, even though I'm not officially a historian.
I would have imagined, like I said, being a state trooper, investigative side, did it help you kind of uncover these hidden histories of the Spring Grove, and did it kind of help guide you in directions of doing this research?
Yes, one of the things I enjoyed about while I was a detective was working on cold cases, and they were usually, within a lifetime. They weren't like hundreds of years old. So having a 250-year-old cold case was, extra exciting to me. So I made friends with a lot of local historians that knew how to dig into past history, research the deeds. Newspapers.com was a very valuable resource because being a mill house, there's advertising, there's a lot of community interest in the property, back in the 1800s. And so I was able to dig up a lot of information from that. That's not available in your typical Google search. So once I uncovered the chain of title from the beginning, which actually goes back to the early 1700s, the first house was built here. Our house wasn't built till 1813, but There was a house on the property before that with mills, two mills running simultaneously, a sawmill and a grist mill. So we discovered all how that materialized and collected all the names of the people that owned the house over the years, and then researching each one of those names to try to learn as much as we could about each owner and what they contributed to society kind of led to all the connections to U.S. history. I could name like I'll just name them off. I won't go into detail to every one. We wouldn't have a long enough show, but
Okay.
I got the Revolutionary War event that happened here, and then the house was built because of the War of 1812. That's when the cost of cotton fabric increased because our ports were blockaded by the British, so we couldn't get our raw cotton over to Europe to be manufactured. So it created an escalation in the price of cotton cloth. So the banks financed the building of my house in 1813 while the war was raging, and they financed the mill factory. They took down the two previous mills and built one giant factory that only a little bit of it's left today. That's the 1812 connection. Then the Civil War, they retooled the factory, the mill factory, to produce instead of cotton, wool for a U.S. Army contract. And then the Underground Railroad passed through. The Industrial Revolution, of course, was directly tied to the property because of the mills. There was some interesting local stuff going on with fire. The mill caught on fire in 1891, kind of ended the milling era. But at this point, I was thinking, well, gosh, I have such great connections to old history. Wonder if it connects to anything more modern, like the Kennedy assassination or Apollo 11.
Right.
And then I just sort of laughed when I said that to myself because I couldn't imagine that also being connected. But then it did actually connect. So there's stories that connect to the Kennedy assassination and also Apollo 11, which, just amazing. I like to think of myself as a good investigator finding all these things, but I doubt it. I could probably go through 10,000 houses and not find one that connects to so many different things.
Yeah, I bet you're absolutely right about that. I want people to know that like you said, you have a book and you are the author of the book. And the book is called The Spring Grove Millhouse, the home with the most ties to American history. And the way you're really describing and telling us all the history that it's tied to, I wouldn't and couldn't and shouldn't doubt that at all. And I would imagine it has more history than any other privately owned home or state as well.
Yeah, that's not something you can easily prove because, it's an opinion kind of thing. But that's kind of the fun of the book is to read it yourself and try to assess whether or not I provided the facts and the evidence that would lead you to that conclusion. And then if you don't believe it at the end, I'm fine with that too. It's fun regardless. But I think most people would agree that it probably is the home with the most ties to American history. I do have a copy of the book here. It has a picture. It was a pencil sketch that was drawn by one of the previous owners. Kind of gives you an idea of what the house looks like.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful house. Been a lot of additions over the years, but they were well done additions that complemented the house.
I need to ask you this because a lot of times when people do purchase a home, newer, older, whatever it is, they're there to renovate and change things. But with this having so much history behind it, why is it and what is the importance of preserving history in something like this?
Well, it's like at first you feel like you own the house, but then you realize that you're just one caretaker of, past generations and future generations. So you want to you want to preserve it as best you can for others and for just history. So you try to do things the way it was done in the old days, but had a lot of previous owners that had done different projects. The windows were modern. Most of the windows were modernized, and so just kind of roll with it. But
Yeah.
the basic look and feel. The wood shutters and the that's half round gutters, but it probably had gutters that were recessed into the roof back, when it was first built. Things change over time, but I think it still captures the essence of the 17, 1800s.
I've seen, modern modernization of old buildings before, where they leave the face of it, but then the interiors and things like that, they modernize. And like I said, especially if you're going to live in this, you want to have the modern windows. You don't want to be living in this drafty old home. You mentioned the Revolutionary War. Is there anything that you can expand on that for us about the war?
Yeah, well, we didn't know that there was a connection to the Revolutionary War when we bought the house. And when Florence was looking through online for information about the general area, she found a link that showed all the different property owners, the first ones that came over to America in this general area, but it didn't have anything specific to our house, but it had links. And she showed it to me. So I started exploring each link, and I clicked on this one link, and my whole computer screen filled up instantly with a map. And in the center of the map was a yellow flash. And I looked at it and was like, that's exactly over my house. And then I looked at the top, the title of the map is 1777. That's when I realized, like, wow, this house is connected to the Revolutionary War. And nobody really knew it. Some historian had discovered this a couple years before we bought the house, but it never really got publicly known. And a lot of the details had not been fully uncovered that I was able to uncover with his help. So that kind of brought a sense of, gosh, I got to know everything about whatever happened here, and that's what led me to the other discoveries as well. But the Revolutionary War is one of the more interesting things, especially with the 250th coming up, and people's interest has peaked with the Revolutionary War. Really, at 1777 was a pivotal year during the Revolutionary War, where Washington kind of gained the advantage over the British. Things kind of turned in his favor. At Spring Grove, it was a turning point for that year. Because General Washington was trying to defend Philadelphia from being seized by the British. That was the British goal of 1777. General Howe brought 16,000 troops by ship to Elkton, Maryland, and then they were going to march 55 miles to seize Philadelphia. General Washington was in Wilmington, Delaware, preparing for General Howe to come through and trying to create a situation where he would end the war with a victory here in Delaware. General Howe was really good at avoiding General Washington. He had exercised some deception, causing Washington to think that he was coming to his defensive position, but he was really just sending decoy to get him thinking that they were coming. And he sent all his troops around Washington's right, the north side of Washington. So Washington had got tricked, so he had got stuck in that position, thinking the war was coming there. And meantime, General Howe's trying to get around him so he could seize Philadelphia without even a fight. So Washington kind of figured out that it was a trick and sent General Weedon towards like a northwesterly direction to try to find where Howe was. And when General Weedon got to the top of the hill on the other side of my creek, he could see the hill on my side of the creek, and on it was probably several hundred British troops on the outskirts of where they were defending their encampment. And so they exchanged fire throughout the night across the creek between these hills, but it was pretty far distance. The British brought some small cannons and fired at the Continentals. Continentals didn't have any cannons there, as far as we know, and their fire was kind of wasteful because it was too great of a distance for the musket back then. Some of the troops were upset about having this fire into the evening and not move forward and not have any meaningful actual fires. One of the officers deserted. But really what was happening, Washington was creating a distraction because he couldn't, just because there was a couple hundred British on my hill where my house is, doesn't mean that was the 16,000. So he needed to make sure. So he used that distraction. He snuck around and looked up Limestone Road, which is about a mile west of my house. And when he looked up the road, he saw the 16,000 British encamping. So now he knew where they were. He verified where they were, sent a letter to John Hancock saying that he knows what he's got to do now. He's going to send his troops to Chad's Ford at Washington 11,000, send it directly to Chad's Ford to set up a defensive position there for the Battle of Brandywine. So that was going to be the war to end the war. So a couple days later, Al arrived there. They had a battle. It was the largest battle of the Revolutionary War as far as manpower, size of the battle, and the length of time. Washington was lost in that battle, but his army survived, and he put up a good fight. And the British eventually seized Philadelphia a couple weeks later. But what that did, it proved that Washington's army could make a stand. And the French needed to know that in order to invest in helping us. With that and some success at Saratoga, the French jumped in 100% with us and caused the British to declare war on the French. And just, from there, so what happened here had an impact on the whole war, even though it wasn't a big bloody battle. If Washington hadn't have found the British here at Spring Grove, Howe could have got around, seized Philadelphia without a fight. We would have been embarrassed, and maybe the French wouldn't have made the investment to help us.
I want to be this curious looky-loo person and ask you how large is your property, and have you done any, let's just call it treasure hunting, to see if there's anything that you have unearthed? That's
Yeah,
anything.
it's the property is 7.5 acres. The creek kind of splits it. We're on the other side of the creek as well. We've done a lot of metal detecting, but we've never found Revolutionary War material on the 7.5 acres. We find a lot of interesting artifacts from the past, old saws and um, old nails and, things like that, but never anything to verify the Revolutionary War event. And one of the things that I was hoping was that somebody else would find something because, if I found a cannonball or something, people could say I bought it at an auction and, just to make my story better. As it turns out, there was an article written in 1992 about a 3-year-old boy that found a cannonball in the same path of where the British were firing at the Continentals. So that was kind of a very neat find. And it was just the right size cannonball. It was a real small one, which is what the diaries indicated they used to fire at the Continentals. Story kind of came together there. There was also the house where Washington met to make his determination to go directly to Chad's Ford doesn't exist anymore, but I know where it was. There was history written that he had a meeting there, but that's kind of, yeah, everybody says Washington stayed at the house, it's kind of an old joke almost. So I didn't want to rely just on that. But luckily, because the owners of the house were Quakers, it was considering a suffering when a military would use their property and they would report all the losses like the hay and the fence posts and any kind of chickens or whatever they took. And they would report that to the Quaker church in the official record so they could keep records of that. And so we were able to trace back the suffering record in the Quaker Church for that piece of property for September of 1777. So that helped solidify the story that already existed about Washington meeting there.
Is your property, the Spring Grove Millhouse, is it listed under any historical thing or preserving for historical monument? And if so, do you have a fear of that? And with the success of your book, with, as I said earlier, looky-loos coming and either knocking on the door or walking around the property at some point in time?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the book's been out since September, and just last weekend, somebody did come down the driveway while I was weeding, and they showed me their book, and I gave them a little tour. But it was I love we didn't do all this energy to fix this place up for just ourselves, so it's always a joy to share it with others.
I mean, that's got to feel good and some sort of uniqueness, and not necessarily uniqueness, but this a special quality of what you have and what you've done and what you're sharing. Because I would imagine, like I said, you didn't preserve this for yourself. It's a historical piece, right?
Right, exactly.
Can you remind everybody once again the name of the book, where they could go to find the book, if you have a website with any other history piece behind the home or
Yeah,
anything like that?
I do have a website that just launched that's called springgrovemillhouse.com, and it has a little more details. You can purchase my book through that website too. and it's also available on Amazon. People that read it really enjoy it a lot. It's just amazing. I never wrote a book before. I never considered myself a professional writer, but the feedback I'm getting, I guess I have to consider myself a professional writer. Otherwise, I wouldn't get so much good feedback from it. It's kind of, it's a unique book because it's investigative history. I'm showing the reader the evidence because it's new history. It's not just footnoted. The part of the story is how I found the evidence and what it meant. So that's part of the story, almost like a crime story. So it makes it more interesting.
That in itself, I think, yeah, would make it more interesting to a wider group of people. And people are always there's so many people interested in crime, history of crime. So this would be almost like I don't want to call it a crime history novel, but you do have the Revolutionary War. You have all these other pieces tied
Yeah.
to it. And like I said, there's a lot of investigative work that you've laid out in your book as well, right?
Yeah, there is a major crime involving one of the owners of my house where his family was the victim of the first kidnapping for ransom in America in 1874, Charlie Ross case. It was as big as the Lindbergh case back then, and it was only not infamous until the Lindbergh case. So that's a pretty interesting story. People enjoy reading about that too.
Were you ever a historian or considered yourself a history buff prior to all of this?
Not really. I enjoy it, but I don't never really got too deep into history, except for my uncle claimed to have found Hitler's hidden stash of the central bank at the end of World War II, and he could never prove that he had found it. And I spent 30 years, eventually found the declassified secret documents that verified his entire story. So that was probably my biggest effort to do anything history wise. That might be my next book.
That was going to be one of my next questions after you've saying the success of being an author on this and hearing a lot of people saying that they like this a lot. What are you going to do next? What are you going to write? But that would
Yeah.
be an interesting. So you're going to be the next big crime novelist, I think.
History crime.
Yes, history. Is there anything else that you would like to add to, let people know either about yourself or about the home or any other history pieces? Because like I said, there's so much history tied to this one single home that you've unearthed.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to explain a little bit about how I wrote the book because there's 200 million books out there actually in the world, and people want to find something unique, and this is very unique in that because I wasn't a professional author, I approached it in a different way, kind of like what I assume Jimi Hendrix. I know he taught himself how to play the guitar, and because he taught himself, he created new sounds that were never heard before. They were creative. So I kind of wanted to capture that same thing to write a book that wasn't, based on studying how to write a book. It was just more of how I felt it should be. So some unique things came through with that, like in the preface of the book. It's probably the first book that tells you to read the last chapter first, or it strongly suggests you to read it. Because I put in the last chapter how all the miracles involved, of how we acquired the house, stuff that wasn't really history, and giving credit to God for all that. And I didn't want to put God in the last chapter. That's kind of like disrespectful. So I said, well, I'll just tease it in the preface of the book, and then people will read it first anyway. But it's not history, so it needed to be in a special place. So when people read that chapter, they kind of get to know me as a person better. So when they go back to the beginning of the book, they're going on like a 250-year journey with somebody they feel like they know because they read that last chapter. Like
Mm.
I'm holding their hand through the experience of revealing the 250 years of history. So that really kind of worked out well. And it was kind of, a special thing that I created that, probably hasn't been done before.
And no one told you to do this. You just decided this is the way that you feel is the best way to do all this.
Yeah. And when people tell me, how cool it was to skip to the last chapter and how much that added to the experience of reading it, that really course, it makes me feel good, like I did something worthwhile. And, it makes me want to share that part of the story with people so they know they're getting an opportunity to read something that's unique, that hasn't been done before, that they'll enjoy.
Yeah, I really do like how you explained that reading that last chapter allows the reader to walk with you through your process and the history. I think that's very, very poor choice of words. Cool. That's very cool.
Thank you.
It's again, I just want to remind everybody the name of the book, once again, is The Spring Grove Millhouse. I spaced it out wrong. I got to say it proper. The Spring Grove Millhouse, the home with the most ties to American history. There I go. That's much better.
Uh, Perfect.
Are you planning on doing any type of audible book with this?
I I'm launched a major marketing campaign, and assuming that I have success with that, most of my marketing has just been to the local community and friends and associates, and so since that was so successful, I'm taking it out further with Facebook and other things, and as it kind of catches on, if it does, like I think it will, then I'll invest in an audio book and some other things that I want to do.
Well, like I said, I'm sure with your local success, I'm sure that this is going to be a wide success, not only because it's America's 250th coming up here, but I think just because the way you're explaining how your book was written, the importance of history, and I'm going to say the care that you took into preserving what needs to be preserved and to be able to be shared with everyone, the property and the book. So I think it's going to be a great success.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And again, once again, you are a retired Brigadier General. So thank you for all that you've done. We're going to make sure that this is going to help because I feel that this is very, very important. So I've got to say thank you very much.
Thank you. Really appreciate the respect for the veterans. We all appreciate that a lot, but most of us really enjoyed our service, and I know I did. But it's nice to be appreciated too. So thank you.
Welcome.